In the brutal reality of sports entertainment, even the most terrifying monsters can disappear without a trace. While we remember the champions and iconic moments, some of WWE's most fearsome monsters found themselves abandoned despite striking fear into the hearts of millions. These were the devastating powerhouses who demolished opponents with ease, the larger-than-life destroyers whose entrance alone sent shivers down spines, the unstoppable juggernauts who seemed impossible to defeat. Today, we reveal the shocking fates of WWF's most legendary monster villains. First up, King Kong Bundy. At over 450 pounds, King Kong Bundy moved like a man half his size. At his peak, this monster demanded referees count to 5, because 3 seconds wasn't enough to prove his total dominance. But in 2019, the walking condominium would face his final opponent, and this time, not even a 5 count could save him. In 1955, Chris Allen Pallies was born in Woodbury, New Jersey. Growing up, Chris was always bigger than most kids his age, but he wasn't just big. He was a natural athlete who dominated in amateur wrestling, winning 2 regional championships before graduating in 1974. After high school, Chris headed to Larry Sharp's Monster Factory Wrestling School in Belmar, New Jersey, the place where giants were made. On March 7, 1981, he debuted in the World Wrestling Federation as Chris Kanyon, scoring his first victory against Strong Kobayashi 4 months later. But it was in Texas, with world-class championship wrestling, where Chris Pallies would transform into the legendary King Kong Bundy. Chris Pallies started out as Big Daddy Bundy, but that name was just the beginning. Everything changed when he got into a nasty feud with Texas wrestling's royal family, the Von Erichs. That's when he joined forces with the smooth-talking manager Gary Hart, who saw something special in the big man. Hart knew exactly what to do. He rebranded his massive wrestler as King Kong Bundy. Just like the famous movie monster, Bundy was huge, intimidating, and impossible to ignore. But sometimes the best things in wrestling happen by accident. During his heated battles with the Von Erichs, Bundy lost his hair in a match. Instead of being a setback, this became his trademark look. That massive, bald head made him stand out from every other wrestler. You couldn't miss King Kong Bundy when he walked into an arena. After making his mark in Texas, Bundy hit the road to become an even better wrestler. He traveled across the country, wrestling in different territories and learning new tricks along the way. In the American Wrestling Association, he terrorized their biggest stars. But his biggest achievement during this time came in Georgia Championship Wrestling. There, he teamed up with a mysterious masked wrestler known as the Superstar, and together they did something incredible. They beat the unstoppable Road Warriors for the NWA National Tag Team Championship. The Road Warriors were considered nearly unbeatable, so this was a huge deal. But it was in Mid-South Wrestling where Bundy came up with something that would make him truly unique. He wasn't satisfied with the regular 3-count pin that every other wrestler used. No, King Kong Bundy demanded the referee count to 5. This wasn't just showing off, it was brilliant psychology. Every time he pinned someone for a 5 count, it sent a clear message to everyone watching. I'm not just beating these guys, I'm destroying them. This 5 count became his calling card, something fans would anticipate every time he stepped into the ring. When King Kong Bundy stormed into the WWF on March 16, 1985, everyone knew something huge was about to happen. The WWF had been running promos for weeks, telling fans that a monster was coming. When Bundy finally stepped through the curtain on Championship Wrestling, jaws dropped. Poor Mario Mancini was in the ring, probably wishing he had called in sick that day. What happened next wasn't just a match. It was a demolition that had fans on the edge of their seats. The loud-mouthed manager Jimmy Hart was grinning from ear to ear, knowing he had just unleashed wrestling's newest nightmare on the WWF. But it was at the very first WrestleMania, in the world's most famous arena, Madison Square Garden, where Bundy really made history. His opponent that night was Special Delivery Jones, a tough veteran who'd been in countless battles. But nobody was ready for what happened next. The bell rang, and before the hot dogs in the concession stand could get cold, it was all over. 9 seconds. That's all it took. Bundy crushed SD Jones in the corner with his crushing big splash in the middle of the ring. The referee couldn't count fast enough, even with Bundy demanding his trademark 5 count. Wrestling fans had seen quick matches before, but this was different. This was a statement that echoed through the wrestling world. King Kong Bundy wasn't just big, he was unstoppable. All through the summer of 1985, Bundy left a trail of broken opponents across the country. But everything changed in September when Jimmy Hart made a deal that would shake up the wrestling world. He traded Bundy to the greatest manager in wrestling, Bobby the Brain Heenan. The Brain knew exactly what to do with his new monster. He aimed Bundy right at the biggest target possible, the legendary Andre the Giant. Now, challenging Andre wasn't something wrestlers did lightly. The 7'4" Giant had been undefeated for 15 years. But Bundy didn't just challenge Andre. He ambushed him during a match and did the unthinkable. He trapped Andre in the corner and delivered splash after devastating splash until Andre's sternum actually cracked under the impact. The message was crystal clear. King Kong Bundy wasn't afraid of giants. He broke them. This wasn't just another wrestling angle. This was the moment Bundy proved he could destroy anyone, no matter how big or legendary they were. The attack on Andre the Giant wasn't just a one-time thing. It kicked off some of the most exciting matches of 1985. Wrestling fans couldn't wait to see these giants clash. It all started heating up on Saturday night's main event, which was a huge deal because wrestling was rarely on network TV back then. On October 3, 1985, everyone tuned in to see an explosive tag team match. In one corner, you had King Kong Bundy teaming up with another giant, Big John Studd. In the other corner stood Andre the Giant, still nursing his injured sternum, alongside the powerhouse Tony Atlas. The building was electric that night. You could feel the tension in the air. But that was just the warm-up. The WWF raised the stakes even higher in the second match when Andre brought in the biggest star in wrestling, the WWF champion himself, Hulk Hogan. Just imagine this scene. Andre the Giant and Hulk Hogan, probably the two most famous wrestlers in the world, standing together in one corner, while Bundy and Studd, two massive monsters, waited in the other. These matches showed everyone a different side of Bundy. Sure, he was devastating in single matches, but now he was proving he could be just as dominant in tag team action. He wasn't just a solo destroyer. He was a smart wrestler who could work with a partner to take down even the biggest stars in the business. Everything came to a head on September 23, 1985, at the world's most famous arena, Madison Square Garden. They called it the Colossal Jostle, and that name wasn't just hype. Picture this: Andre the Giant, all 7'4", and nearly 500 pounds of him, finally getting his hands on Bundy one-on-one. The garden was packed. Say Bundy was just another big guy. He had earned his place among wrestling's elite monsters. After proving he could hang with Andre the Giant, King Kong Bundy had his eyes on an even bigger prize, the WWF Championship around Hulk Hogan's waist. But Bundy didn't just politely challenge Hogan to a match. No, he made a statement that shocked the wrestling world on Saturday night's main event. Together with his massive partner, the Magnificent Morocco, Bundy launched a surprise attack on Hogan that left fans gasping. This wasn't your typical wrestling beatdown. They hit Hogan so hard they actually cracked his ribs. Every time Hogan took a breath in the following weeks, you could see the pain on his face. This wasn't just wrestling storyline stuff. Those bruises were real, and everyone knew it. This brutal attack set the stage for something huge, the main event of WrestleMania 2 on April 7, 1986. But Hogan and Bundy weren't just going to have a regular match. No, they were going to be locked inside a steel cage. The build-up to this match was intense. Every time Bundy appeared on TV, he'd remind everyone how he'd injured Hogan's ribs, promising to finish the job inside the cage. Meanwhile, Hogan was selling those injured ribs, making fans wonder if their hero could possibly survive being trapped in a cage with this monster. When WrestleMania 2 finally arrived, the atmosphere was electric. Just imagine this scene: the massive steel cage lowering around the ring, Bundy's intimidating figure filling one corner, and Hogan, still favoring those injured ribs, pacing in the other. What followed was something wrestling fans still talk about today. Bundy used every inch of that cage, throwing Hogan into the steel, squashing him in corners, and coming incredibly close to winning the title several times. The fans were on their feet, holding their breath with every near fall. Could this be the night Hulkamania died? But just when it looked like Bundy might actually pull it off, Hogan found that supernatural strength he was famous for. Fighting through the pain of his injured ribs, he managed to hit his legendary leg drop, the move that had finished off countless opponents before. Even though Bundy didn't win the title that night, he did something just as important. He helped make WrestleMania feel like the biggest event in wrestling. This wasn't just another match. It was a war between giants that proved WrestleMania was truly wrestling's Super Bowl. After the huge cage match with Hogan, Bundy wasn't done making waves. He teamed back up with his old partner Big John Studd, and together they stumbled into one of the strangest and most fascinating feuds in wrestling history: the mystery of the machines. Here's where things get really interesting. A group of massive wrestlers started showing up in masks, calling themselves the Machines. The leader was Giant Machine, and something about him seemed really familiar. Bobby the Brain. Heenan started putting the pieces together. He was convinced that Giant Machine was actually Andre the Giant in disguise. See, Andre had been suspended at the time, and Heenan believed this was his clever way of sneaking back into the WWF. Bundy and Studd became like wrestling detectives, trying to prove it was Andre under that mask. Every week, they'd try new ways to expose Giant Machine, measuring his footprints, comparing his moves to Andre's, even trying to rip the mask off during matches. This wasn't just about wrestling anymore. It was like a mystery show mixed with athletics. Fans packed arenas to see these wild six-man tag matches where Bundy, Studd, and Heenan would face different combinations of the Machines and their partners. The matches were full of drama and comedy, with Heenan constantly pointing out evidence that Giant Machine was Andre, while Bundy and Studd tried to unmask their mysterious opponents. But that's not all Bundy was up to during this time. He and Studd set their sights on the WWF Tag Team Champions, the British Bulldogs, Davey Boy Smith, and the Dynamite Kid. Now, this was really interesting because it showed a whole different side of Bundy. The Bulldogs were way smaller but incredibly quick and hard-hitting. Everyone wondered how a monster like Bundy would handle these speedy opponents. But he proved he could do more than just squash people. He adapted his style, showing he could keep up with the Bulldogs' faster pace. Sure, they never won the tag team titles, but these matches proved Bundy wasn't just a one-trick giant. He could work with anybody, big or small, and make the matches exciting. WrestleMania 3 showed fans a side of King Kong Bundy they never expected to see. Instead of battling giants, he found himself in one of the most unusual matches ever, a mixed six-person tag team match involving Little People wrestlers. Bundy teamed up with Little Tokyo and Lord Littlebrook against an odd team of Hillbilly Jim and his partners, the Hang Away. Finally, Bundy had enough. In a moment that made the massive crowd gasp, he grabbed Little Beaver, hoisted him up, and slammed him to the mat. Then came the crushing elbow drop, a move that looked absolutely devastating given the size difference. The referee and partners turned on him. This wasn't just another match. It showed that Bundy could tell a story in the ring and get fans emotionally invested. But 1987 wasn't done with King Kong Bundy yet. He entered the prestigious King of the Ring tournament, proving he had the stamina to wrestle multiple tough matches in a single night. This was a big deal, because most giants couldn't last through several matches like that. Bundy powered his way to the finals, where he faced the flashy and technical Macho Man, Randy Savage. Though Savage eventually won, Bundy showed everyone he could hang with the most skilled wrestlers in the business. Then came one of the biggest moments of late 1987. Bundy actually beat Hulk Hogan. Sure, it was by countout on Saturday night's Main Event 13, but beating Hogan in any way was a huge deal back then. Remember, this is when Hulkamania was at its peak. Even though Hogan got his revenge in the rematch on the next show, that victory proved Bundy was still one of the most dangerous men in wrestling. Anytime he stepped in the ring, fans knew there was a real chance they might see Hulkamania come crashing down. After dominating the WWF for years, Bundy surprised everyone by leaving in early 1988. He mostly stayed away from the big spotlight, showing up here and there in smaller wrestling shows. But you can't keep a monster down forever. In late 1994, wrestling fans' jaws dropped when King Kong Bundy made his return to the WWF. This time, he was part of Ted DiBiase's $1 Million Corporation, a group of wrestlers backed by the $1 Million Man's money. It was like seeing a legend come back to life. His comeback match couldn't have gone better. At the 1994 Survivor Series, Bundy teamed up with another monster, Bam Bam Bigelow. Together, they did something incredible. They were the only survivors in their elimination match against Lex Luger's team of American heroes. For a moment, it felt like the unstoppable Bundy of old was back. But wrestling had changed while Bundy was away. The 1995 Royal Rumble showed just how much. Everyone expected the returning Giant to dominate the match. After all, how do you throw someone that big over the top rope? But then something shocking happened. Mabel, another massive wrestler who was on the rise, eliminated Bundy after just 3 minutes. The crowd couldn't believe it. This wasn't how the story was supposed to go for a legend like Bundy. His final WrestleMania moment came at WrestleMania 11, where he faced one of the most intimidating wrestlers ever, The Undertaker. Now, this wasn't quite the same as his legendary cage match with Hogan or his quick victory over SD Jones. But even though Bundy was older now, you could still see flashes of what made him so scary in the first place. When he trapped The Undertaker in the corner for his famous avalanche splash, longtime fans got goosebumps, remembering the monster who had terrorized the WWF in the 1980s. While he didn't win the match, he showed that even in the twilight of his career, King Kong Bundy could still make fans hold their breath whenever he stepped in the ring. After hanging up his wrestling boots, Chris Pallies had to deal with something much tougher than any opponent he'd faced in the ring: the long-term effects of his wrestling career. Like many wrestlers who gave their bodies to entertain fans night after night, Pallies was worried about brain injuries that could affect the rest of his life. He wasn't alone in this fight. Along with other wrestlers, he joined a big lawsuit against WWE, claiming the company hadn't done enough to protect wrestlers from serious head injuries. The lawsuit brought up some heavy issues. It said WWE knew about the dangers of repeated head impacts, but didn't do enough to protect their wrestlers. According to the legal papers, the company didn't just fail to provide proper medical care, they actually tried to hide how serious these injuries could be. This wasn't just about money. It was about wrestling's dark side and the price athletes pay for entertaining fans. Things got complicated when the lawsuit was thrown out by the courts in September 2018. But the effects of this legal battle went beyond the courtroom. Next up, Yokozuna.
2 championship reigns, 280 days as WWF champion, multiple WrestleMania main events. On paper, Yokozuna had one of the most successful careers in wrestling history. But beneath all that success was a man dealing with serious weight and health issues that the wrestling business only made worse. Rodney went from being part of wrestling's most famous family to playing a character that required him to gain massive amounts of weight. The result was both incredible success and ultimate tragedy. Today we're telling his complete story. Born into wrestling royalty, Rodney was never supposed to be Japanese at all. This San Francisco native came into the world in 1966 with a family tree that reads like a who's who of Samoan wrestling legends. We're talking about the Rock's family here, folks. His uncles were Afa and Sika, better known as the Wild Samoans. His cousins included future stars like The Rock and Roman Reigns. This wasn't just some random big guy who wandered into wrestling. This was a kid who grew up around the business. Rodney started training with his uncle Afa when he was still a teenager. Afa didn't go easy on him just because they were family. The training was brutal, old-school style. We're talking about hours of conditioning, learning how to take bumps properly, and understanding ring psychology. Afa taught him that being big wasn't enough. You had to move like an athlete and think like a performer. Rodney soaked it all up, and by 1985, he was ready to make his professional debut. But the wrestling business had other plans for this Samoan giant, plans that would completely erase his real identity. See, when you're 500 pounds and athletic, promoters start seeing dollar signs. But they also start seeing gimmicks. Rodney began working as Coquina Maximus, traveling through smaller promotions in Mexico, New Japan, and AWA through the late 1980s and early 1990s. He was learning his craft the hard way, working in front of crowds that didn't speak English and promoters who paid in cash if you were lucky. During his time in Japan, something interesting happened. Rodney actually studied sumo wrestling techniques. He wasn't just playing a character, he was learning legitimate sumo moves and incorporating them into his wrestling style. The Japanese crowds ate it up. Here was this massive Samoan guy who understood and respected their traditional sport. But back then, he was still Kokina, still proud of his Samoan heritage. His natural athleticism, despite his size, caught the attention of WWE scouts. Keep in mind, this was the early 1990s. Vince McMahon was looking for larger-than-life characters who could work in the ring. Most 500-pound guys were slow and limited in what they could do. But Rodney could move. He could do drop kicks. He could climb the ropes. He was essentially a super heavyweight who wrestled like a cruiserweight. When WWE offered him a contract in 1992, there was one major catch. They didn't want Kokina Maximus the Samoan, they wanted a Japanese character. WWE created the Yokozuna sumo gimmick and paired him with Mr. Fuji to present a foreign sumo champion. They gave him traditional Japanese entrance music, a Japanese flag, and incorporated real sumo elements like the salt-throwing ritual before matches. Everything about the character was designed to make American audiences believe they were watching an authentic Japanese sumo champion who had invaded their wrestling. But here's the thing, Rodney faced a difficult career decision. He could stay true to his Samoan roots and probably wrestle in smaller promotions for the rest of his life. Or he could accept this new identity and become a main event star in the biggest wrestling company in the world. He chose his career. The transformation was complete when he walked through those curtains for the first time as Yokozuna. The announcers sold him as a legitimate sumo champion from Japan. Mr. Fuji spoke for him in broken English and Japanese phrases. Even wrestling magazines played along with the story. Fans had no idea that this Japanese monster was actually a third-generation Samoan wrestler from San Francisco. Yokozuna made his television debut on October 31st, 1992 on WWE Superstars, then his pay-per-view debut at Survivor Series on November 25th, 1992. The character worked so well that fans completely bought into the illusion, making Yokozuna an instant monster heel. Within months of his debut, he was destroying established stars and climbing the card toward championship matches. The WWE had created the perfect foreign menace for the 1990s, but this identity swap would make him a star while also creating problems that would follow him for the rest of his career. Now came the real test, proving that all this hype could translate into actual in-ring performance. Yokozuna's ring work immediately separated him from every other super heavyweight in wrestling. When he debuted in late 1992, WWE had a problem. How do you make a 500-pound man look athletic? Most wrestlers that size moved like walking refrigerators. They plodded around the ring, threw slow punches, and relied on their size to intimidate opponents. But WWE needed something different. They needed a monster who could actually wrestle, not just stand there and look big. The answer came in the form of this Samoan giant who moved far better than most super heavyweights. His television debut happened on an episode of Superstars in October 1992. They started him off against jobbers, which made sense. You don't throw a new character against main event talent right away. But even in these squash matches, something was different. Yokozuna wasn't just standing there and overpowering guys. He was hitting drop kicks. He was showing footwork. He was moving around that ring like he weighed 250 pounds instead of 500. The announcers were selling it hard, but they didn't have to oversell it. The guy was legitimately athletic. Some questioned whether a man that size could work longer matches, and that skepticism would shape how he was booked. What happens when he gets in there with guys who can actually wrestle back? What happens when the matches go longer than 3 minutes? Can he keep up that pace? Can he tell a story in the ring? These were all fair questions because history was full of big men who looked great in short matches but fell apart when they had to work longer programs. Here's what shocked audiences who expected a slow, plodding giant. Yokozuna could work at a pace that most heavyweights couldn't match. His conditioning was actually pretty good for a guy his size. He understood ring psychology better than wrestlers who had been in the business for years. When he hit that dropkick, it wasn't just a spot to show off. It fit into the flow of the match. When he used his size advantage, it made sense within the story they were telling. This wasn't just a big guy doing big guy things. This was a wrestler who happened to be massive. His signature moves told the whole story of what made him special. The leg drop was devastating because of the impact, but it also showed his agility getting up to the second rope. The Samoan drop demonstrated both power and technique, but the move that ended matches instantly was the Banzai drop. This wasn't just Yokozuna falling on guys. He would climb to the second rope, measure his opponent, and come down with all 500 pounds concentrated on their chest. The sound it made when he connected was sickening. Wrestlers would sell it like they'd been hit by a truck because that's basically what happened. The salt ritual added mystique and made every entrance feel special. But more than that, it gave him character depth. This wasn't just a big guy who walked to the ring and started wrestling. This was a character with traditions and rituals that fans could connect with, even if they were supposed to hate him. Survivor Series 1992 was where things really clicked into place. His match against Virgil wasn't just a squash, it was a statement. Virgil was a guy who could work, someone fans knew could have competitive matches with top stars. When Yokozuna demolished him in under 5 minutes, it sent a message to the entire roster. This new guy wasn't just another monster of the month. He was the real deal. The way he tossed Virgil around that ring, then finished him with the Banzai drop, showed everyone watching that the WWE had something special on their hands. Within months, this supposed rookie was being positioned for championship contention, proving size and skill could coexist. They were moving him up the card faster than almost any wrestler in company history. By early 1993, he was already in programs with established main event talent. The WWE wasn't treating him like a novelty act or a transitional character. They were booking him like their next big star. But nobody could have predicted what would happen at the next major pay-per-view event. Yokozuna entered the 1993 Royal Rumble at number 27 and eliminated Randy Savage, establishing him as an immediate main event threat. What happened that night in Sacramento created a record that still stands today. He became the first wrestler ever to win the Royal Rumble from the number 27 position. Entry number 27 was considered a major disadvantage because you're coming in so late with most of the ring already full of tired but dangerous competitors. The Royal Rumble concept is simple. 30 wrestlers enter at timed intervals. You get eliminated by going over the top rope with both feet hitting the floor, and the last man standing gets a WrestleMania title shot. Most experts predicted established stars like Randy Savage or The Undertaker would win, not the newcomer who'd only been on television for a few months. When Yokozuna's music hit and he entered at number 27, the crowd didn't really know what to expect. He came to the ring with Mr. Fuji, did his salt ceremony, and stepped through the ropes. The ring was packed with talent, but something interesting happened almost immediately. Yokozuna started eliminating guys left and right. We're talking about rapid-fire eliminations that caught everyone off guard. He tossed out Virgil like he was nothing. Tatanka went flying. Even established mid-card wrestlers couldn't do anything against his size and power. His elimination technique was different from what you usually see in Royal Rumbles. Most wrestlers try to wear their opponents down first, maybe work on their legs or back, then try to get them over the rope. Yokozuna just grabbed guys and threw them out. No setup needed, no extended struggle at the ropes. He was treating grown men like they were children, just picking them up and depositing them on the floor. The crowd was getting louder with each elimination because they were seeing something they'd never seen before. The key moment came when he eliminated Randy Savage. Savage was the champion, the guy everyone expected to win or at least make it to the Final Four. When Yokozuna grabbed him and tossed him out without much trouble, that's when you could feel the energy in the building change. Fans started realizing this monster might actually win the whole thing. The announcers were selling it hard, talking about how nobody could match his size and strength. By the time it got down to the final few wrestlers, Yokozuna was clearly in control. He eliminated Carlos Colon, then Tito Santana. When it came down to him and Randy Savage's tag team partner, the outcome wasn't really in doubt. Yokozuna had been the most dominant wrestler in the match from the moment he entered. His victory was decisive and clear. No controversy, no lucky breaks. He just overpowered everyone and won. This single victory transformed Yokozuna from monster heel to legitimate main event player overnight. Winning the Royal Rumble meant he was getting a title shot at WrestleMania 9 against Bret Hart. That's the biggest stage in wrestling, But more than that, his dominant performance showed that WWE was completely behind him as their next major villain. They weren't treating him like a novelty act anymore. He was the guy they wanted carrying the company as champion. The stage was set for a classic good versus evil showdown at WrestleMania 9. Bret Hart, the technical wrestling hero from Canada, against Yokozuna, the massive foreign monster who had bulldozed through the competition. On paper, it looked like the perfect main event to crown a new champion. But what actually happened in that championship match would create one of wrestling's most controversial moments and leave fans arguing about it for decades. WrestleMania 9 at Caesars Palace on April 4, 1993, featured one of the most controversial endings in the event's history, and it happened in just 22 seconds. You had Bret Hart, the technical wrestling master and fan favorite, defending his WWE Championship against Yokozuna, the unstoppable monster heel. This was classic good versus evil booking. Hart represented everything fans loved about wrestling: skill, heart, and determination. Yokozuna was the foreign threat, the massive villain who crushed opponents with raw power. The build-up to this match was perfect. Hart had been champion since the previous October and was having great matches with everyone they put in front of him. Meanwhile, Yokozuna had been destroying wrestlers for months, culminating with that dominant Royal Rumble victory. The story wrote itself. Could Hart's technical skills overcome Yokozuna's size advantage? Could the champion find a way to get this 500-pound monster off his feet? Fans were genuinely invested in seeing if their hero could overcome what seemed like impossible odds. The match itself was actually pretty good for what it was. Hart came out with a game plan. He wasn't trying to overpower Yokozuna because that would be stupid. Instead, he focused on using his speed and technical skills to stay out of trouble. He worked Yokozuna's legs, trying to chop the big man down. He used hit-and-run tactics, getting in quick shots, then backing away before Yokozuna could grab him. For most of the match, Hart was actually controlling the action. He had Yokozuna down on the mat several times. He was working that leg, trying to set up for the sharpshooter. The crowd was getting behind Hart because it looked like he might actually pull this off. You could feel the energy building as fans thought they were about to see their champion overcome the monster through pure wrestling skill. Hart was doing everything right, and it was working. Then everything changed in the worst possible way. Mr. Fuji, who had been relatively quiet at ringside, suddenly got involved. He climbed up on the apron while Hart had Yokozuna in trouble. The referee went over to deal with Fuji, which meant he wasn't watching the action in the ring. That's when Fuji threw a handful of salt right into Hart's eyes. The champion was instantly blinded, stumbling around the ring trying to clear his vision. Yokozuna saw his opportunity and grabbed the blinded Hart. He scooped him up and dropped him with a belly-to-belly suplex. Then he climbed to the second rope for the banzai drop. Hart couldn't see it coming, couldn't move out of the way, couldn't do anything to defend himself. When all 500 pounds came crashing down, it was over. The referee counted to 3, and Yokozuna was the new WWE champion. The celebration lasted about 20 seconds. Yokozuna was jumping around the ring, Mr. Fuji was celebrating, and the crowd was booing loudly. Then Hulk Hogan's music hit. Hogan came down to the ring to supposedly check on his friend Bret Hart. He helped Hart to the back, which seemed like a nice gesture from a veteran to a fellow wrestler. But then Hogan came back to the ring, and things got weird fast. Mr. Fuji got on the microphone and challenged Hogan to an impromptu match right there. Hogan initially refused, playing up the whole reluctant hero thing. But then Hart, still selling the salt in his eyes, encouraged Hogan to take the match. So Hogan agreed, and they had an instant championship match at WrestleMania with no advance notice or promotion. The match lasted less than a minute. Fuji tried the salt trick again, but this time it backfired. The salt hit Yokozuna instead of Hogan. One leg dropped later, and Hogan was the new champion. Yokozuna had held the WWE Championship for exactly 22 seconds before losing it to a guy who wasn't even scheduled to wrestle that night. Plans changed at the last minute. Hogan walked out as champion, a decision that many wrestlers and fans still debate. This booking decision would anger fans for decades because it undermined Hart's title reign and made Yokozuna's first championship feel meaningless. Hart lost his title due to cheating, which made him look weak. Yokozuna won and lost the championship so quickly that his victory felt like a footnote rather than a crowning achievement. But Yokozuna would get his chance at redemption soon enough. The summer of 1993 was about to turn him into something much bigger than just another wrestling champion. WWE decided to create that challenger through the most American way possible, a patriotic spectacle that would get massive media attention. They booked the USS Intrepid, a World War II aircraft carrier turned museum in New York Harbor, for what they called Yokozuna's Body Slam Challenge on July 4, 1993. The setup was simple but brilliant. Yokozuna would stand in the middle of the ship's deck, and any athlete from any sport could try to body slam him. If they succeeded, they'd win prize money. If they failed, well, they'd probably get embarrassed on national television. WWE positioned this as impossible due to Yokozuna's massive size. At over 500 pounds, he was bigger than most NFL linemen. The company was so confident that nobody could slam him that they offered serious cash prizes to anyone who could pull it off. They invited athletes from all over. NFL players showed up. Olympic weightlifters came out. Bodybuilders, powerlifters, and strongmen all took their shots. One by one, they failed. Some couldn't even get Yokozuna off his feet. Others managed to lift him slightly but couldn't complete the slam. Yokozuna would just stand there, arms crossed, barely moving while these world-class athletes struggled with his dead weight. Each failure made him look more unstoppable and more arrogant. The spectacle tapped into early 90s American versus foreign heel storytelling. Athletes failed to slam him on the deck of the Intrepid until Luger arrived by helicopter, creating perfect theater that explained why it mattered for TV and PR. Yokozuna became a symbolic foreign menace. This wasn't just about wrestling anymore. They were making it about national pride. Here was this supposed Japanese champion showing up America's best athletes on one of the country's most famous military vessels. When Lex Luger arrived via helicopter and successfully slammed the champion, everything changed. Luger wasn't supposed to be there. He wasn't advertised, wasn't announced, and most fans had no idea he was coming. The helicopter landing on the Intrepid was pure theater, but it worked perfectly. Here was this all-American hero literally dropping out of the sky to answer the challenge when no other American athlete could get the job done. Luger's slam of Yokozuna was the moment WWE had been building toward all day. The crowd exploded. Yokozuna looked shocked. Mr. Fuji was beside himself. In one moment, Luger had done what nobody else could do. Proved that this foreign monster wasn't unstoppable after all. The visual of Luger holding his arms up in victory on the deck of an aircraft carrier with the New York skyline behind him was perfect American hero imagery. The Intrepid moment turned Luger into a mainstream babyface and set up their SummerSlam program for August 30th, 1993. Luger had been working as a heel before this, but the Body Slam challenge instantly turned him face. Suddenly, he was the guy who could stand up to Yokozuna when nobody else could. The media coverage was massive. ESPN covered it, newspapers ran photos, wrestling magazines put it on their covers. Both wrestlers got elevated to new heights because of one body slam. The patriotic fervor surrounding their eventual SummerSlam showdown was unlike anything wrestling had seen in years. WWE turned their match into America versus Japan. Luger's entrance at SummerSlam featured red, white, and blue pyrotechnics. Yokozuna came out with Japanese flags and traditional music. The crowd was whipped into a frenzy before the match even started. Signs everywhere said things like "Slam Yoko" and "USA Rules." This felt bigger than just a wrestling match. Their SummerSlam match had the controversial count-out finish that protected both men. Luger knocked out Yokozuna with a loaded forearm, but couldn't get him back in the ring before the 10 count. So Luger won the match, but Yokozuna kept the title because championships don't change hands on countouts. It was frustrating for fans, but smart booking because it kept the feud going. The Body Slam challenge had backfired by creating his biggest rival, but it also cemented Yokozuna's role as wrestling's ultimate villain. He had never been more hated or more important to the company's success. But before he could truly establish himself as a dominant champion, there was unfinished business to handle. King of the Ring on June 13, 1993, gave Yokozuna the chance to prove that his WrestleMania victory wasn't a fluke. He had won the championship from Bret Hart, then lost it immediately to Hulk Hogan in that controversial impromptu match. Now he was getting a proper one-on-one rematch with Hogan for the WWE Championship. This time, there wouldn't be any surprise appearances or last-minute booking changes. Just champion versus challenger in a straight-up title match. The setup felt different from their WrestleMania encounter. Hogan was the defending champion coming into this match, which meant he had something to lose. At WrestleMania, he was just making a surprise appearance to help his friend Bret Hart. Here at King of the Ring, he was the target. Yokozuna was the hunter, and everyone knew he wanted payback for what happened 3 months earlier. The storyline was simple but effective, the monster heel getting his shot at redemption. WWE added an interesting wrinkle to the rematch by bringing in photographer Harvey Whippleman, whose camera flashes could potentially blind Yokozuna. This was their way of acknowledging what happened at WrestleMania, without directly saying that Mr. Fuji's salt throw was the reason Yokozuna won the first time. They were setting up the possibility that Hogan might use similar tactics. Those camera flashes could be just as blinding as throwing salt. The psychology was there. If Yokozuna couldn't see, he couldn't use his size advantage effectively. The match played out completely differently from their WrestleMania encounter, with Yokozuna dominating the aging Hogan from the opening bell. This wasn't a quick squash match where interference decided the outcome in under a minute. Yokozuna was in control for most of the contest, using his size and strength to wear down the champion. Hogan tried his usual comeback spots, but they weren't working against someone this big. His punches barely moved Yokozuna. His attempt at a body slam failed completely. The old Hulkster magic wasn't happening. You could see that Hogan was struggling with Yokozuna's size in ways he hadn't dealt with before. Most of Hogan's opponents over the years were guys he could eventually overpower or outmuscle when it came time for his comeback. But Yokozuna was just too big and too strong. When Hogan tried to whip him into the ropes, Yokozuna reversed it and sent Hogan flying instead. When Hogan went for his big boot finisher, Yokozuna caught his leg and dumped him on his back. Nothing was working for the champion. The turning point came when Mr. Fuji turned the tables, using the camera flash against Hogan instead of helping his own wrestler get blinded. Whippleman was positioned at ringside with his camera, waiting for the right moment to blind Yokozuna and help Hogan retain his title. But Fuji was smarter this time. He grabbed the camera away from Whippleman and used the flash to blind Hogan instead. The champion was stumbling around the ring, unable to see, while Yokozuna positioned himself for the finish.
Next up, Vader. Big Van Vader was one of wrestling's most agile big men, whose moonsaults and devastating power moves made him a superstar in both Japan and America. He went from being an NFL lineman to becoming a 3-time WCW World Champion and the most feared gaijin in Japanese wrestling history. After decades of punishing his 400-pound frame with high-flying moves, Vader's body began to break down. In 2016, doctors delivered Vader a death sentence. He had just 2 years to live. The year was 1987, and professional wrestling was undergoing a seismic shift. What once was a business dominated by technically gifted performers who could go an hour in the ring was rapidly transforming into something bigger, literally. Promoters had discovered a simple truth: size sold tickets. The template for success had a name: Hulk Hogan. At 6'7" with his famous 24-inch pythons, Hogan proved that impressive physicality combined with charisma could draw unprecedented crowds. Every promoter wanted their own Hulk Hogan, but genuine superstars were rare. Promoters began recruiting athletes with proven backgrounds: football players, weightlifters, martial artists. Yet most struggled with wrestling's unique demands. What wrestling needed was unprecedented: a super heavyweight with cruiserweight agility. Someone who could throw opponents across the ring one moment and fly through the air the next. Enter Leon White, a 6'5", 450-pound former NFL lineman whose journey to becoming wrestling's most feared monster began with a devastating career-ending injury. What transforms a broken football player into the embodiment of destruction in the squared circle? For White, this unexpected transformation would take him from the bright lights of the Super Bowl to the smoke-filled arenas of Japan, creating a legacy no one could have predicted. Before he was breaking backs and powerbombing opponents through tables, Leon White was dominating on the football field at the University of Colorado. His exceptional play as an offensive lineman earned him second-team All-American honors, catching the attention of NFL scouts who saw immense potential in his combination of size and athleticism. That potential turned into reality when the Los Angeles Rams selected White in the third round of the 1978 NFL Draft. White's football career seemed to be on the perfect trajectory. By his second season, he had helped the Rams reach the biggest stage in American sports, Super Bowl 14. Though the Rams ultimately fell to the Pittsburgh Steelers, White had achieved what most NFL players only dream of. His future in professional football looked bright, until fate cruelly intervened. During training camp following that Super Bowl appearance, White suffered a devastating knee injury that would ultimately end his NFL career. In an instant, everything he had worked toward was gone. The rehabilitation was grueling, and the prognosis was clear. His knee would never hold up to the demands of professional football again. What now? It's the question that haunts every athlete whose career ends prematurely. White found himself at a crossroads familiar to many former professional athletes. Still young, physically gifted, but stripped of the identity that had defined him since college. The transition from celebrated athlete to regular civilian can be crushing, and many struggle to find purpose after the roar of the crowd fades away. For 2 years, White searched for a new direction. Then, in 1985, a fortuitous connection changed everything. Brad Rheingans, a former Olympic wrestler turned wrestling trainer, saw something special in White. Where others saw a washed-up football player, Rheingans recognized a rare combination of natural athleticism and imposing size that could translate perfectly to the squared circle. Under Rheingans' guidance, White began the difficult process of learning an entirely new physical craft. The footwork, the body control, the psychology of professional wrestling. It was all foreign territory. But White attacked his training with the same dedication that had once made him an All-American, determined to prove he could excel in this new arena. By December 1985, just months after beginning his training, White made his professional debut for the American Wrestling Association. His initial ring name reflected his football background, Baby Bull. The moniker would later evolve to Bull Power, but the connection to his gridiron past remained clear. Promoters hoped that White's football credentials would give him instant credibility with wrestling audiences. But something wasn't clicking. Despite his imposing presence and growing in-ring skills, White struggled to find his identity in American wrestling. The Bull Power character lacked the distinctiveness needed to stand out in the crowded landscape of 1980s wrestling. He was big, he was strong, but American audiences hadn't yet seen what made him special. Wrestling fans had seen football players try to transition to the ring before, and many had failed to make a lasting impression. White needed something more, a character, a presence, a style that would separate him from every other big man in the business. But that transformation wouldn't happen on American soil. It would require a journey thousands of miles from home. In 1987, White joined a wrestling tour heading to Germany, where he competed for Otto Wanz's Catch Wrestling Association. For many wrestlers, these international tours were simply a way to make extra money and gain experience. For White, it would be the doorway to destiny. During those German shows, White's raw power combined with his surprising agility for a man of his size caught the attention of someone who would change the course of his career forever. Riki Choshu, a booker for New Japan Pro Wrestling, witnessed White's performances and immediately recognized the potential that American promoters had somehow missed. What Choshu saw wasn't just another big man. He saw a legitimate athlete who moved with uncanny quickness despite his massive frame. He saw a performer who could bring authenticity and danger to the Japanese rings. He saw the monster that wrestling had been waiting for. Choshu approached White with an opportunity that would transform him from a struggling ex-football player into one of the most feared wrestlers on the planet. New Japan Pro Wrestling wanted him, not as Bull Power, but as something entirely new. Something terrifying. Something Japanese audiences had never seen before. For White, this invitation represented more than just another booking. It was a chance to reinvent himself completely. a chance to leave behind the shadow of his football career and forge a new legacy in a land where his size and strength would be weaponized in ways American promoters had never imagined. As White boarded the plane to Japan, he couldn't have known that the character waiting for him would become one of the most iconic in wrestling history. He couldn't have known that the helmet, the mask, and the name they had prepared for him would strike fear into the hearts of wrestlers and fans alike for decades to come. The flight to Japan was no ordinary journey for Leon White. What awaited him wasn't just another wrestling gig, it was a complete transformation that would redefine what a monster heel could be. Japan saw something in the massive American that US promoters couldn't fully envision. A physically imposing force capable of becoming an object of genuine terror, not just another big man going through the motions. When White stepped off that plane in December 1987, he wasn't yet Big Van Vader. The character New Japan Pro Wrestling had in mind would push boundaries in ways the American wrestling scene hadn't dared. Japanese promoters understood that creating a truly fearsome villain required more than just size. It demanded presence, mystique, and the kind of legitimacy that only came from authentic physical dominance. The transformation began with the mask. Not just any mask, but an intimidating black face covering that obscured White's features while emphasizing his massive frame. Then came the crowning touch, the smoking helmet. This wasn't merely a costume piece, it was psychological warfare. As White made his entrance, the helmet would shoot smoke into the arena, creating an otherworldly effect that made fans genuinely uncomfortable. This wasn't your typical wrestling entrance, this was the arrival of something monstrous. The character itself drew inspiration from Japanese folk traditions, giving it cultural resonance that American audiences might not fully appreciate. For Japanese fans, this wasn't just another foreigner coming to their shores. This was a manifestation of something primal and threatening, crafted specifically to provoke visceral reactions. The name itself, Big Van Vader, carried a weight and menace that bull power never could. But the true genius of Vader's Japanese transformation went beyond aesthetics. It was in how perfectly the character aligned with Japan's distinctive wrestling philosophy. Where American wrestling often prioritized theatrical storylines and larger-than-life personalities, Japanese puroresu demanded something more fundamental: believable fighting spirit and legitimate physical confrontation. In the Big Van Vader character, White found the perfect vehicle to embrace this philosophy. Every strike looked and felt devastatingly real. His style didn't just simulate combat, it existed in that razor-thin space between performance and actual fighting. When Vader hit someone, they stayed hit. When he suplexed an opponent, the impact reverberated through the building. The line between Leon White the performer and Vader the destroyer became increasingly blurred. What made him truly revolutionary wasn't just his willingness to hit hard, it was his shocking mobility for a man his size. Most 450-pound wrestlers moved like they were wading through quicksand, but Vader could move with the explosive power of a much smaller man. His signature Vader bomb, climbing to the second rope and launching his massive frame onto a prone opponent, showcased an athleticism that defied physical logic. Japanese fans, with their sophisticated understanding of wrestling as physical art, immediately recognized something special in this gaijin monster. Here was a foreigner who not only respected their wrestling traditions but elevated them through his unique combination of size, power, and athletic ability. He didn't just adapt to the Japanese style, he transformed it through sheer physical dominance. This marriage of character and capability produced moments that transcended typical wrestling fare. On April 24, 1989, Vader achieved something previously unthinkable when he defeated Shinya Hashimoto to become the IWGP Heavyweight Champion, the first foreign wrestler ever to hold Japan's most prestigious title. In a wrestling culture where national pride and fighting honor were central themes, allowing a gaijin to capture their crown was the ultimate acknowledgement of Vader's extraordinary impact. This wasn't just a booking decision. It was a cultural milestone that broke long-standing barriers in Japanese wrestling. For promoters to entrust their championship to a foreigner spoke volumes about Vader's exceptional ability to connect with Japanese audiences through his physical intensity rather than promos or character work. He communicated through the universal language of legitimate toughness. What made Vader's achievement even more remarkable was how he earned Japanese fans' respect despite being positioned as their ultimate adversary. They didn't cheer for him, they feared him. But that fear came with profound respect. His matches became must-see events precisely because they blurred the line between scripted entertainment and genuine physical confrontation. When Vader stepped through the ropes, the stakes felt higher, the danger more palpable. His hard-hitting approach perfectly aligned with Japanese wrestling's emphasis on strong style, a philosophy that valued realistic striking and submission work over theatrical flourishes. Vader didn't just participate in this tradition, he became one of its most feared practitioners. His forearm strikes weren't just for show, they contained enough force to legitimately stagger opponents. His power moves weren't just visually impressive, they carried genuine impact that sometimes resulted in real injuries. Yet what truly separated Vader from other Gaijin monsters who had come before him was his willingness to absorb punishment as readily as he dished it out. Japanese wrestling culture valued fighting spirit above all else, the ability to endure hardship and still push forward. Vader embodied this quality not through dramatic selling, but through his authentic toughness. When struck with a stiff kick or punch, he didn't crumple dramatically. He absorbed the blow and came back with something even more devastating. This combination of believable offense and credible defense made Vader uniquely captivating to Japanese audiences. They recognized in him something rare, a foreign villain who understood and respected their wrestling traditions enough to fully embody them. He wasn't playing a character who could absorb punishment. He was demonstrating authentic toughness that couldn't be faked. As his reputation grew throughout Japan, Vader became more than just another foreign heel passing through. He became a measuring stick, the ultimate test for any Japanese wrestler looking to prove their own fighting spirit. To stand toe-to-toe with Vader and survive was to demonstrate legitimate toughness. To defeat him was to achieve wrestling immortality. What began as a simple character transformation had evolved into something far more significant. Vader had become a revolutionary figure in Japanese wrestling, combining elements that had previously seemed incompatible. He offered the intimidating size that American promotions valued, along with the legitimate physicality that Japanese audiences demanded. He could deliver both spectacular power moves and believable striking exchanges. He could be both a monster heel and a respected fighting champion. This perfect synthesis of traits made Vader not just successful but truly transformative within Japanese wrestling. He didn't just fill a role, he expanded the possibilities of what a Gaijin monster could be. Before Vader, foreign heavyweights in Japan were often one-dimensional attractions. After him, they had a new standard to live up to, one that required not just size but athletic ability, not just presence but legitimate physical credibility. Vader's character revolutionized what a Gaijin monster could be, but the man behind the mask possessed something even rarer, a pain threshold that defied human limits. Most wrestlers build reputations on carefully crafted personas. But Leon White's legend was forged in moments of genuine, jaw-dropping toughness that blurred the line between character and reality. April 24, 1990, at the Sumo Hall in Tokyo. What should have been just another championship defense for Vader against Stan Hansen instead became the night that cemented his superhuman reputation forever. During an exchange of stiff shots, standard for a Japanese strong-style match, Hansen's thumb caught Vader directly in the eye. This wasn't a worked spot or planned moment. The impact was so severe that Vader's eyeball was literally forced out of its socket, hanging against his cheek. For any normal human being, this would mean immediate medical attention. The match would stop. The injury would likely end a career. But Vader wasn't a normal human being. As officials rushed to check on him, Vader did something that still shocks wrestling historians to this day. He reached up, physically pushed his displaced eyeball back into its socket with his own fingers, and demanded the match continue. Let that sink in for a moment. With his eyeball dangling from the socket, Vader's first instinct wasn't to seek medical help. It was to manually reinsert it and keep fighting. The Japanese crowd, already accustomed to incredible displays of fighting spirit, watched in stunned silence as this American monster refused to acknowledge what should have been a catastrophic injury. This wasn't the carefully choreographed violence that defines professional wrestling. This was a moment of legitimate, horrifying trauma that Vader simply decided to work through. And work through it he did, finishing the match despite sustaining an injury that would send most people into shock. What makes this story even more remarkable is that it wasn't an isolated incident. Throughout his career, Vader displayed an almost incomprehensible tolerance for pain that went far beyond professional toughness into something almost mythological. He routinely worked through broken ribs, wrestling full matches while struggling to breathe. He shrugged off hand injuries that would have sidelined other performers for months. Concussions, which are now treated with extreme caution, were just another day at the office for the man behind the mask. This supernatural ability to absorb punishment earned Vader a unique form of respect among his peers, though often from a distance. Many wrestlers who faced him speak of both admiration and hesitation. They respected his legitimacy and commitment to physical intensity, but that same quality made many hesitant to work with him. Being in the ring with Vader meant accepting a simple truth. You were going to get hit, and hit hard. Working with Vader was like being in a car accident that lasted 15 minutes, one former opponent recalled. His forearm shots weren't the theatrical strikes common in American wrestling. They were delivered with thunderous force that could legitimately daze his opponents. In an industry built on the illusion of combat, Vader brought something dangerously close to the real thing. What made Vader truly extraordinary, however, wasn't just his capacity to endure pain. It was how he combined that toughness with unexpected athletic ability. The physics seemed impossible. How could a man weighing over 450 pounds move with such agility? Yet there he was, ascending to the second rope and launching into moonsaults, backward somersaults that smaller cruiserweights struggled to execute properly. Imagine the sight. A man the size of a small refrigerator flying through the air with the grace of someone half his size before crashing down with devastating impact. It wasn't just impressive, it was revolutionary. Before Vader, big men were expected to be plodding powerhouses who relied on size alone. He shattered that template completely, executing drop kicks, leaping clotheslines, and even top rope maneuvers that defied every convention about what super heavyweights could do. This combination created something wrestling had never seen before. A performer with legitimate monster size and power, who could also work at a pace and athletic level previously reserved for much smaller competitors. He wasn't just big, he was explosively agile. He wasn't just tough, he was legitimately dangerous. He wasn't just intimidating, he was technically proficient. Japanese fans recognized this rare combination immediately, embracing Vader as a unique force of nature whose matches delivered something they couldn't see anywhere else. His bouts became must-see spectacles where the impossible seemed routine. Could he really drop-kick an opponent at that size? Could he really absorb that much punishment without flinching? The answer was always yes, defying expectations with every performance. While his character work was compelling, the smoking helmet, the intimidating mask, the fearsome presence, it was this foundation of legitimate physical anomaly that gave Vader's persona its undeniable authenticity. He wasn't playing a monster. In many ways, he was one. The lines between Leon White, the performer, and Vader, the character, blurred into something wholly unique in wrestling history. This authenticity translated into an aura that few wrestlers have ever achieved. When Vader entered an arena, the atmosphere changed. This wasn't just another big man playing tough. This was someone who had proven, in the most graphic ways possible, that his toughness was horrifyingly real. That eyeball incident wasn't just a story told by wrestling fans. It was documented reality, captured on film for anyone brave enough to watch. As news of Vader's Japanese exploits began filtering back to American wrestling fans through tape trading and wrestling publications, anticipation built about what might happen when this force of nature eventually returned to American shores. How would audiences accustomed to the more theatrical presentation of American wrestling respond to someone whose approach was so legitimately physical? What would happen when Vader's uncompromising style collided with American expectations? The whispers about Vader's Japanese dominance had reached American shores, but WCW fans were about to experience something far more terrifying than rumors. When a 450-pound mastodon, who could legitimately end careers, stepped into an American ring. On January 19, 1990, the entire wrestling landscape was forced to change around one unstoppable man. WCW executives knew exactly what they had acquired: a monster with credibility. But even monsters need direction, which is why they paired Vader with the legendary Harley Race as his manager. This wasn't just smart booking, it was strategic brilliance. Race, a former 8-time NWA World Champion, lent instant legitimacy to the masked behemoth. When Race spoke about Vader's destructive capabilities, fans believed him because Race himself was known as one of the toughest men in wrestling history. American audiences had never seen anything quite like Vader before. While the theatrical American style of the era focused on larger-than-life characters who mostly protected each other in the ring, Vader brought something entirely different: an uncompromising physical intensity that made viewers uncomfortable. His matches weren't just performances, they looked like genuine assaults. Each thunderous blow echoed through arenas, making fans wince and wrestlers in the back reconsider their career choices. This wasn't kayfabe or an act. Opponents genuinely feared working with him because the pain would be real. The fear Vader generated reached new heights during a match where he broke Joe Thurman's back with a powerbomb. This wasn't a storyline injury or an exaggeration. The impact of Vader's move caused legitimate, career-altering damage. Word spread quickly through the locker room: be careful with Vader or pay the consequences. Suddenly, when Vader stood across the ring from an opponent, the tension in the arena was palpable. Fans weren't just watching a match, they were witnessing someone fighting for survival. UCW found the perfect showcase for their new monster in Sting, the company's most popular babyface. Their feud became an instant classic built on a simple but compelling dynamic: the colorful, athletic hero against the unstoppable force of nature. Their confrontations felt like watching David versus Goliath, except Goliath moved with shocking speed and agility. When Sting would finally connect with his signature Stinger Splash, arenas would erupt, not just because it was an exciting move, but because anyone willing to deliberately collide with Vader seemed to be tempting fate itself. The company quickly realized Vader's value as their premier monster heel. While most big men were slowly escorted up the card over months or years, Vader smashed through the hierarchy with the same force he used to demolish opponents. His rise was meteoric by wrestling standards, culminating in winning the WCW World Heavyweight Championship from Ric Flair, the standard-bearer for American wrestling excellence. This wasn't just any title change. For Vader to defeat Flair, the most respected technical wrestler of his generation, sent a powerful message. Technique and experience couldn't overcome this force of nature. Over his WCW tenure, Vader would become a 3-time world champion, each reign establishing him further as the company's most dominant figure. What made Vader truly special was how his presence transformed the entire roster. Every babyface in WCW now had to be measured by one question: could they credibly stand up to Vader? Those who couldn't were relegated to midcard status, while those who stepped up to the challenge were elevated through their willingness to face the monster. WCW literally restructured their hero hierarchy based on who might believably survive in the ring with him. Fan reactions to Vader were unlike those for any other heel. When most villains appeared, crowds would boo and jeer, standard responses to wrestling bad guys. But when Vader's music hit, a different energy filled the arena. There was fear, genuine concern for his opponents, and a distinct uneasiness that something truly dangerous might happen. This wasn't just another wrestling match, it was a potential catastrophe unfolding before their eyes. Vader's dominance created a unique problem for WCW bookers. How do you create suspense when your monster seems unbeatable? The solution came through psychological storytelling that focused on the courage of his opponents rather than their physical chances. When Sting, Dustin Rhodes, or Davey Boy Smith stood across from Vader, the story wasn't about whether they could overpower him, but whether their heart and determination could somehow find a way to survive and possibly triumph. Television audiences grew as Vader's reputation spread. Casual viewers who had drifted away from wrestling returned to witness this phenomenon for themselves. Was there really a 450-pound man who could perform moonsaults? Could someone that large move with such devastating speed? The curiosity factor alone drove ratings. but it was the legitimate aura of danger surrounding Vader's matches that kept viewers coming back. Behind the scenes, Vader's presence created a fascinating dynamic. While many wrestlers feared working with him, others specifically requested matches, seeing a program with Vader as career-defining. If you could survive, or better yet, look competitive against him, your stock in the industry immediately rose. Few accolades meant more in early 1990s WCW than hearing locker room veterans say, "He stood toe-to-toe with Vader." WCW's creative team quickly discovered another benefit to having Vader on the roster. He made wrestling feel real again. In an era when fans were becoming increasingly aware of wrestling's predetermined nature, Vader's matches had a believability that others lacked. When he hit someone, it looked and sounded like it hurt because it genuinely did. This authentic quality became WCW's competitive advantage during a difficult period for the industry. As Vader's reputation for physical brutality grew, so did the anticipation for what would happen when someone decided to fight fire with fire. The wrestling world didn't have to wait long. A particular opponent was emerging, someone with a legendary pain threshold and willingness to suffer that matched even Vader's capacity to inflict damage. This wasn't just another challenger. This was someone who would purposely seek out punishment that would make normal wrestlers quit the business entirely. Enter Cactus Jack, a man who didn't just survive pain, he craved it. While most wrestlers prayed to escape Vader's brutality, Foley had a different strategy: demand more punishment than even the monster was comfortable delivering. Their collision in WCW wasn't just a feud, it was legitimate combat disguised as entertainment that would permanently change wrestling's landscape. When Mick Foley first stepped into the ring against Vader in WCW, nobody could have predicted what would follow. Foley, wrestling under his deranged Cactus Jack persona, wasn't interested in technical wrestling displays. He wanted violence, and in Vader, he found the perfect dance partner. Their initial encounters immediately stood out for their unrelenting physicality, creating a stark contrast with what audiences had grown accustomed to seeing on American television. As their rivalry intensified, so did the violence. Their matches became showcases of punishment that blurred the line between scripted entertainment and actual combat. While most feuds of that era featured carefully choreographed sequences, Vader and Foley seemed determined to one-up each other with each brutal encounter. Body slams on concrete, steel chair shots, and devastating power moves became standard fare in their battles. The infamous Lost in Cleveland storyline demonstrated just how far WCW was willing to push the envelope with this feud. After a particularly savage beating at Vader's hands, storylines portrayed Foley as suffering such severe trauma that he developed amnesia, wandering the streets of Cleveland with no memory of who he was. This wasn't just another wrestling angle, it was psychological horror dressed as sports entertainment, elevating their rivalry beyond simple physical confrontation into something more disturbing and compelling. Their Texas death match raised the bar for extreme wrestling in America. This wasn't the sanitized violence typical of early 90s wrestling. It was a gruesome spectacle that had viewers genuinely concerned for the participants' well-being. The match structure, which allowed for continuous punishment until one man couldn't answer a 10 count, was perfectly suited for showcasing both Vader's destructive power and Foley's unnatural ability to absorb punishment. But nothing in their American encounters compared to what happened in Munich, Germany, in March 1993. During their match, Vader executed a powerbomb on Foley, but not onto the protected ring canvas, onto the exposed concrete floor. The impact was catastrophic. In the chaos that followed, a moment that changed everything for me in wrestling. Despite suffering an injury that would send most people rushing to the hospital, Foley insisted on finishing the match. This wasn't just toughness. It was a level of dedication to performance art that defied rational explanation. What made the Vader-Foley feud so revolutionary wasn't just its violence, but how that violence was used to tell a compelling story. Each match built upon the previous encounter, escalating the stakes and intensity. This wasn't mindless brutality, it was physical storytelling at its most visceral. Vader portrayed the unstoppable force, while Foley's willingness to endure increasingly horrific punishment made him the ultimate immovable object. The impact of their feud extended far beyond their own careers. As footage of their matches circulated among wrestling fans, a new generation of performers took note. The physical intensity they displayed would eventually influence the development of hardcore wrestling styles that would dominate the late 1990s, particularly in ECW and later WWE's Attitude Era. The Vader Foley blueprint, combining legitimate physical impact with compelling character work, became a template for creating memorable wrestling feuds. For Vader, the feud cemented his reputation as wrestling's most dangerous opponent. If this monster could inflict this level of damage on someone as willing as Foley, what could he do to those who weren't prepared to sacrifice their bodies? The mystique around Vader grew exponentially, making him an even more valuable commodity in the wrestling business. For Foley, the feud was transformative in different ways. Before facing Vader, he was viewed as a brawler with limited appeal. After surviving wrestling's most destructive force, Foley earned a level of respect that would follow him throughout his career. His willingness to endure Vader's brutality established the hardcore legend persona that would eventually make him a main event star and WWE champion years later. Industry figures have frequently cited this program as one of wrestling's most influential. Wrestling historian and journalist Dave Meltzer has called their matches revolutionary in American wrestling, noting how they changed audience expectations for physical storytelling. Fellow wrestlers have studied these matches as masterclasses in how to make violence meaningful rather than gratuitous. The cultural impact of the Vader-Foley feud extends beyond just wrestling history. Their battles represented a significant shift in what American television audiences would accept in terms of violence and physical storytelling. While previous wrestling feuds maintained a certain cartoonish quality, Vader and Foley brought a realism that was both uncomfortable and compelling. When blood appeared on screen, viewers knew it wasn't the product of hidden razor blades. It was the result of legitimate impact. What's perhaps most remarkable about their rivalry is how it elevated both men despite its brutality. This wasn't a case of one wrestler being sacrificed to make another look strong. Through their willingness to push physical boundaries, both Vader and Foley emerged as bigger stars than before they met. Their matches didn't just entertain, they told the story of two men willing to sacrifice their bodies for their art in ways that resonated deeply with audiences. With his reputation as wrestling's most feared monster firmly established, Vader finally arrived in the WWF at the 1996 Royal Rumble. The moment was electric. Here was the Destroyer, who had terrorized 3 continents, entering the biggest wrestling company in the world. Fans who knew his work in Japan and WCW held their breath as Vader stormed the ring from the number 13 position, quickly eliminating 4 competitors before Shawn Michaels eventually tossed him out. The message seemed clear. Vader was going to be an unstoppable force in the WWF. The initial plans for Vader couldn't have been more promising. Vince McMahon positioned him as the ultimate monster heel, managed by Jim Cornette and flanked by other villains like Owen Hart and the British Bulldog in a stable called Camp Cornette. The blueprint had been drawn. Vader would steamroll through the roster before eventually challenging for the championship. And not just any championship program, he was slated to face the company's golden boy, Shawn Michaels. The original booking plans revealed something even more shocking. Vader wasn't just supposed to face Michaels at SummerSlam 1996. He was actually scheduled to win the WWF Championship. This was almost unheard of for a newcomer, especially one with Vader's physically imposing style. It spoke volumes about how much potential McMahon saw in the character. For a brief moment, it seemed Vader would reach even greater heights than his WCW and Japanese runs. But then came SummerSlam 1996, and the infamous moment that many wrestling historians point to as the beginning of Vader's WWF downfall. During their championship match, a miscommunication occurred, and Michaels, known for his backstage political power and mercurial temperament, broke character and openly yelled at Vader in the middle of the match. The monster who had terrorized wrestling's biggest stars was being dressed down on live pay-per-view. What fans didn't know was that the problems ran much deeper than one awkward in-ring moment. Behind the scenes, Shawn Michaels had apparently voiced complaints about Vader's personal hygiene, claiming the big man hadn't washed his ring gear. It seems almost absurd. The feared monster who had popped his own eyeball back into its socket was being undone by locker room politics and petty complaints. The consequences came swiftly. The planned championship program with Vader was scrapped entirely, and Psycho Sid was inserted as Michael's next challenger instead. Just like that, Vader went from being the company's next top heel to just another name on the roster. The pattern that would define his WWF run had been established. Big introduction, promising start, then inexplicable scaling back. Vader did get some high-profile programs after the Michael situation, most notably a feud with The Undertaker. Their match at Canadian Stampede showcased Vader's ability to work with larger opponents, proving he could still deliver the quality performances when given the opportunity. But these matches, despite being well-received, never led to Vader reclaiming the top monster position that seemed guaranteed when he first arrived. Instead, Vader's character began suffering the death of 1,000 cuts. Vince McMahon, notorious for wanting to put his own stamp on established wrestlers, reportedly pushed to rename Vader as the Mastodon. It was a baffling suggestion. Vader was already one of the most established character names in wrestling, with recognition across multiple continents. Though Vader successfully resisted this particular change, it symbolized the fundamental misunderstanding of what made him special. The most telling sign of Vader's diminished status came in his later feuds. The man who had headlined major shows against Sting, Ric Flair, and the Great Muta was now wrestling mid-card programs with Goldust and Mark Henry. These weren't bad matches, but they represented a stark contrast to his monster status elsewhere. The most physically intimidating performer in wrestling had somehow become just another heel, scrambling for television time. By 1998, the frustration had clearly boiled over. The man who had been promised championship glory was now lost in the shuffle, with no clear creative direction. For a performer who had been positioned as an unstoppable force in every previous company, this treatment was simply unacceptable. When Vader finally asked for his release from the WWF in 1998, it marked the end of what should have been his crowning achievement, a run with wrestling's largest company that would cement his legacy. What makes Vader's WWF tenure so fascinating isn't just that it failed to meet expectations, but rather how it failed. This wasn't a case of a wrestler not connecting with the audience or delivering poor performances. Vader was still capable of the same physically intense matches that had made him famous. The crowd still reacted to him as a credible monster. The disconnect existed entirely in how the company positioned him compared to what made him successful elsewhere. In many ways, Vader was a victim of the WWF's tendency to reshape performers in their own image. The complexity and authenticity that made Vader special in Japan and WCW, the legitimately scary intensity, the shocking athleticism for his size, the uncompromising physicality, were all watered down in favor of a more standardized WWF heel presentation. They had taken a unique talent and tried to make him just another big man. The bitter irony is that Vader's time in the WWF coincided with the company's shift toward a more adult-oriented, physically intense product that would become the Attitude Era. The real Vader, the uncompromising, legitimately frightening force who had terrorized Japan and WCW, would have been perfect for this new direction. Instead, by the time the WWF fully embraced this edgier approach, Vader was already on his way out the door. The WWF may have squandered Vader's potential, but his career was far from over. In a fascinating twist of fate, the same uncompromising style that got him in trouble in America would make him the subject of underground wrestling worship in the internet age, turning a failed run into merely one chapter of a legendary career. When Vader walked out of the WWF in 1998, he wasn't retreating in defeat. He was returning to the place where he'd always been royalty. Japan welcomed the Mastodon back with open arms, treating him like the conquering hero American promoters had failed to recognize. The contrast couldn't have been more stark. While Vince McMahon had relegated him to mid-card status fighting guys like Goldust, Japanese promotions immediately restored him to main event prominence. The reaction from Japanese fans told the whole story. These weren't audiences politely applauding a former star. These were the same passionate crowds who remembered the man who once caused riots after defeating Antonio Inoki. They hadn't forgotten the monster who terrorized their heroes. In Japan, Vader wasn't just another big guy. He was professional wrestling's ultimate final boss. This period of Vader's career revealed just how dramatically Japanese and American wrestling philosophies had diverged. In the WWF, backstage politics and creative disagreements had steadily eroded his standing. Meanwhile, All Japan Pro Wrestling embraced everything that made Vader special: his legitimately stiff strikes, his surprising agility, and his uncompromising approach to physicality. They didn't try to water down his character or rebrand him with ridiculous new names. They simply let Vader be Vader. Throughout the early 2000s, Vader continued delivering the goods in high-profile matches across major Japanese promotions. When Pro Wrestling Noah emerged as a powerhouse, Vader joined their roster and maintained his status as one of wrestling's most intimidating figures. While American fans were being fed a steady diet of WWE's increasingly cartoonish presentation, Japanese audiences were witnessing the authentic Vader experience: bone-crushing strikes, devastating power moves, and that same surprising athleticism that defied his massive frame. What's most remarkable about this period is how Vader maintained his credibility well into his 40s and beyond. Most super heavyweights see their capabilities drastically diminish with age. Their already limited mobility further decreases, their wind gets shorter, and their matches become increasingly difficult to watch. But Vader continued performing at a high level, delivering the hard-hitting matches fans expected, even as his body absorbed punishment that would have ended most careers years earlier. The irony of Vader's renaissance wasn't lost on American wrestling insiders. Here was a performer the biggest American promotion had essentially discarded, continuing to draw money and create compelling matches overseas. Every thunderous chop and explosive powerbomb in a Japanese ring was a reminder of what American audiences were missing. Vader did make occasional returns to American wrestling, including appearances in TNA, Impact Wrestling. These brief runs served to reintroduce him to younger American fans who might have missed his prime years. While these appearances didn't reach the heights of his Japanese work during this period, they kept his name in circulation within American wrestling circles. In 2012, WWE brought Vader back for a memorable confrontation with Heath Slater during a Legends program. For longtime fans, it was a bittersweet moment, a glimpse of the monster they remembered, but also a stark reminder of how poorly he'd been utilized during his full-time run with the company. When Vader's music hit and he stormed to the ring, the audience reaction made it clear. They hadn't forgotten what made him special, even if WWE's creative team had failed to capitalize on it years earlier. Perhaps the most unexpected development in Vader's later career was his emergence as a cult hero among internet wrestling fans in the 2000s. As high-speed internet became commonplace, footage of Vader's legendary Japanese matches began circulating among hardcore wrestling enthusiasts. Young fans who had only seen his watered-down WWF run were suddenly discovering the real Vader, the unstoppable force who had revolutionized what a super heavyweight could do in the ring. Online wrestling forums buzzed with discussions of his most brutal matches. Clips of his moonsaults and devastating power moves circulated on early video-sharing platforms. Wrestling journalists and historians began re-evaluating his place in the pantheon of all-time greats. In the digital age, Vader's legend grew beyond what it had been during his active career, as fans could now access his entire body of work, free from the limitations of what American television had been willing to show. This digital rediscovery coincided with a new generation of wrestlers who clearly showed Vader's influence. Suddenly, the wrestling world was seeing big men who could move like cruiserweights, who weren't afraid to leave their feet, who combined intimidating size with surprising athleticism. The DNA of Vader's revolutionary approach was evident in performers who had studied his matches on VHS tapes and internet clips. When you watch modern super heavyweights execute top rope maneuvers or display agility that defies their size, you're seeing Vader's legacy in action. He didn't just change what was possible for wrestlers of his era. He permanently altered expectations for what big men in wrestling could accomplish. The moonsault, once considered a move exclusively for lighter performers, became a possibility for larger wrestlers because Vader had shattered that ceiling decades earlier. What makes Vader's later career so fascinating is how it ultimately secured his legacy despite the mishandling he experienced in the WWF. Had his career ended after his disappointing American run, he might have been remembered as just another casualty of bad booking, a monster who couldn't translate his overseas success to the biggest American stage. Instead, by continuing to thrive internationally and becoming an underground favorite among a new generation of wrestling fans, Vader cemented his place as one of wrestling's most influential figures. His career trajectory offers a powerful lesson in wrestling's global nature and the different values of various wrestling cultures. While American promotions often prioritized character and storytelling over in-ring credibility, Japanese promotions recognized that Vader's legitimacy as a physical performer was his greatest asset. They understood that his aura came not from elaborate storylines or catchphrases, but from the very real sense of danger he brought to every match. The same unforgiving style that made Vader a global phenomenon was silently destroying the man behind the character. For all the punishment Leon White delivered in the ring, his body was absorbing an equal or greater amount, and eventually that debt would come due. The physical toll of Vader's career wasn't just about the spectacular moments that made highlight reels. It was the accumulated damage of thousands of bumps, countless stiff shots, and the brutal wear and tear that came with hurling his 450-pound frame around wrestling rings night after night. While fans cheered the monster, the man was breaking down, piece by piece. Weight management became one of White's most persistent struggles throughout his career. The same massive frame that made him intimidating in the ring created serious complications for his health. Carrying 450 pounds, and sometimes more, put tremendous strain on his joints, cardiovascular system, and internal organs. The constant travel schedule of a professional wrestler made maintaining a healthy diet nearly impossible, creating a vicious cycle where his weight exacerbated existing injuries and created new health problems. But physical challenges weren't the only demons White battled. Behind the scenes, alcohol became a destructive force in his life. He developed a particular fondness for tequila that led to some dark moments away from the spotlight. In 2002, those struggles became public when White was arrested for public intoxication following a heavy drinking episode, just one of several brushes with the law that stemmed from his relationship with alcohol. "I had problems with alcohol," White would later admit, acknowledging how substance abuse had affected both his wrestling career and personal relationships. The drinking wasn't just a recreational activity. It became a coping mechanism for the constant pain, the relentless travel schedule, and the pressure of maintaining his fearsome persona. By 2007, the foundation of White's personal life had completely crumbled. After years of alcohol abuse combined with the grueling demands of a global wrestling schedule, his marriage collapsed. For many wrestlers, the end of a relationship becomes just another casualty of the business, but for White, this moment became a turning point. The breakdown of his marriage forced him to confront the destructive patterns that had taken over his life. In the wake of this personal crisis, White made the decision to quit drinking entirely. He also dramatically reduced his travel schedule, recognizing that the constant grind of wrestling shows around the world was destroying what remained of his health. These changes represented a fundamental shift in priorities, a recognition that the man needed to take precedence over the monster. But sometimes life doesn't allow for second chances. In 2016, White was involved in a serious car accident that triggered a cascade of health concerns. What might have been a manageable incident for someone else became the catalyst for a devastating diagnosis for the wrestling legend. Doctors delivered the news that would have broken many men. White was suffering from congestive heart failure. With the directness that had characterized his in-ring persona, White shared this news with fans through Twitter. "Told by two heart doctors that my heart is worn out from football and wrestling," he wrote. "I have 2 years to live." The prognosis was blunt and terrifying. Doctors had given one of wrestling's most fearsome figures a definitive countdown clock on his remaining time. How does someone respond to being told they have 2 years to live? For White, the answer was pure Vader. Rather than retreating from public life or spending his remaining time in quiet reflection, he approached his diagnosis with the same determination and fighting spirit that had defined his wrestling career. Fans were stunned when, despite his diagnosis, White continued to accept occasional bookings, stepping into the ring even as his health deteriorated. This decision horrified many fans and fellow wrestlers, who feared watching a legend collapse in the ring. But for White, wrestling wasn't just a job. It was fundamental to his identity. The man who had pushed through matches with an eyeball hanging out of its socket wasn't about to let heart failure keep him from the only life he truly understood. It was a final act of defiance against mortality, a refusal to go quietly that perfectly encapsulated the spirit that had made Vader such a compelling figure. In the ring, Vader never surrendered to pain or fear. Facing death, Leon White showed that same unyielding determination. The monster and the man had become inseparable, for better and worse. White's struggle with heart failure became symbolic of a broader truth about professional wrestling. The business takes far more from performers' bodies than fans ever fully comprehend. For every spectacular moment that brings crowds to their feet, there's a physical price that continues long after the cameras stop rolling. The same performances that build legends often ensure those legends won't live to enjoy their elder years. Wrestlers of White's era entered the business with little understanding of the long-term effects their chosen profession would have on their bodies. There were no concussion, the combined dangers of their size, their style, and the grueling schedule they maintained. They simply performed until they couldn't anymore, often turning to painkillers, alcohol, or other substances to push through a physical constitution. But when it arrived, it came with the finality of a doctor's prognosis that left no room for interpretation. 2 years. The same body that had carried him to championships across 3 continents had reached its breaking point. When death finally came for Leon White on June 18, 2018, it silenced the roar of the monster. But what happens to a legend's influence when the man behind it is gone? While Vader's heart may have failed him in the end, his revolutionary impact continues to beat through the veins of professional wrestling in ways most fans never recognize. The final chapter of Vader's story began with one last battle, this time on the operating table. In 2018, White underwent open heart surgery, a desperate attempt to address the heart condition that had been slowly claiming his life. At 63 years old, the body that had seemingly defied human limitations for decades finally reached its breaking point. The surgery that was meant to extend his life instead became his final match, one even Vader couldn't power through. What followed was something remarkable. A wrestling world divided by promotions, countries, and styles suddenly united in grief. Wrestlers from WWE, New Japan, independent circuits, and retirement all shared stories of the man who had changed what it meant to be a giant in the squared circle. These weren't just the obligatory rest in peace messages that follow any wrestling death. They were deeply personal reflections on a performer who had genuinely altered the trajectory of the business. But such a performer may never emerge again. Vader was a product of his time, working in an era when wrestling still maintained some mystery, when global styles were just beginning to cross-pollinate, when a performer could build different characters in different territories. The industry has changed too much for another Vader to follow the exact same path. What remains instead is his influence, distributed across generations of performers who each carry a piece of his legacy. Every time a big man flies through the air, every time a monster heel works at a pace that defies expectations, every time a super heavyweight executes a technical move with surprising grace, Vader's vision for what wrestling could be lives on. Like and subscribe for 100 years of luck. Until next time.